Hello and happy October! I have brought you another non-film related video, but all in honor of the Halloween season. I am a fan of creepy story channels. I am a particular fan of Lazy Masquerade. I love listening to those very creepy, disturbing stories that you feel compelled to listen to in the dark and then regret it later on. But in honor of my love of creepy stories and the fact that I've been telling them at a Halloween party since I was a little kid, I thought I'd bring that to my channel this Halloween season. So today I'm sharing with you 5 creepy stories that I have found after combing the internet. You may have heard these stories before, but if you haven't, I hope you enjoy them. Our first story is the haunted share house. I once moved into an unusually large, incredibly old 3-story terrace in Newcastle. There was only one other occupant on the top floor, myself in the middle, and the lower level was inhabited and sat in a blanket of dust. Both myself and my housemate worked a lot, so seldom saw each other, but pretty early on I started to feel like I had other company. I would hear constant footsteps below me, which then escalated to sounds of someone running up and down the hall. During the middle of the night, I would hear sprinting up and down the stairs which were next to my room. Some nights it became so loud I would jump out of bed, sure there was a kid loose in the house playing a trick. I would get up and walk around and text my housemate to see if she was home, but she would reply and say that she wasn't. I started to even investigate the downstairs area, but the dust was completely unmarked. About 3 weeks in, I started seeing a guy who would occasionally stay at my house. One night as we were sleeping, he bolted awake screaming after hearing similar sounds. He jumped up and shone his phone light down the stairs, but no one was there. It was a terrifying reminder that I wasn't going crazy, but it was also one of the last times he would stay over. After 3 months of what felt like sleepless nights, I saw my housemate out at a bar and confronted her about my issues. I thought she'd look at me like I was stupid, but instead she said, "Yeah, so I didn't want to tell you because I really needed to pay the rent, but the house is haunted and your room is supposedly the worst." Needless to say, I moved out a fortnight later. Number 2, Betsy the Doll. Like most people these days, I had a fucked up childhood. Who doesn't, right? My father took off before I was born and my mother was left to care for me on her own, a skill she was sorely lacking. My mother slipped right back into the drug-addled party lifestyle she'd enjoyed before I was born and had soon turned our 2-bedroom apartment into an opium den. For the first 5 years of my life, I walked around in a confused, terrifying mist. The smoky air would flood down the hallway from our living room and slip under my bedroom door. It always seemed to linger for days. I know now that my mother wasn't a bad person, just a victim of her addictions. When she did have spare money, she would put food in the house or buy me clothes from Goodwill. The only pieces of furniture I had in my bedroom was a mattress set and a little blue and white toy chest. Not that I had a lot of toys to put in it, of course, just the 3 I had gotten for birthdays. One was an art kit, one was a red wagon, and the last, my pride and joy, was a doll named Betsy. Betsy was my best friend. We would have imaginary tea parties together, sleep together, and even take baths together. Sometimes I even remember her voice. When I thought back on my conversations with the doll in adulthood, I realized that I was likely suffering from delusions, thanks to the always present butts of smoke that laid claim to the dingy hallways and drafty bedrooms of our small apartment. Still, I remember the sound of her voice, a pleasant, tingling lilt that was almost always coupled with a raucous giggle. I also remember the things that she said to me and the things she wanted me to do. She asked me to steal usual food or pens and pencils. She wanted me to bring her forks and knives and hit the bad man who slept on our couch. It was always something, and I would always get in trouble, but she wouldn't. When I told my mother who had put me up to these games, she would scoff and shake her head. She never believed me. Adults never do. Around my 6th birthday, I asked my mother for a birthday party. I wanted to invite the mean girls from school and serve them cake and ice cream to make them like me. I remember standing in the kitchen that day with such hopes, having just asked the most important question of my entire life. The glass bottle of Coca-Cola I held was shaking in my nervous hands. I waited with bated breath as my mother continued putting groceries away, almost as if she hadn't heard me, but I knew she had. Finally, just as I had failed a second time to muster the courage to repeat my question, she turned around and gave me a flippant shake of her head.
A birthday party? Laura, that's ridiculous. I can't afford to feed 15 children that aren't even mine. Hell, I can barely afford to feed you. You eat like an elephant, especially for a girl your size, or, I'm sorry, Betsy does. There's barely anything left for me to eat around here, much less a classroom of other people's brats.
My face fell as she shook her head, mumbled something else under her breath, and stumbled off into the living room. I heard the music go up then as more people walked in the door. Some left, some stayed. I never knew them either way. It simply wasn't fair. My mother threw parties all the time. What about me? I was a kid. All my friends had birthday parties, and now the mean girls at school would know I was too poor to have one, and they would tease me even more. I felt tears start to well in the corners of my eyes, and I choked back a sob while I ran to my room and slammed the door behind me. Betsy was lying on the bed and smiling. She was always smiling. Usually it made me feel better, but today it just made me angry. She just kept staring at me, smiling. She was going to tell me to do something bad again. That was why my mother wouldn't throw me a birthday party. It was because of all the trouble I got into because of her. This was her fault. Betsy didn't have to go to school, and Betsy never got into trouble like I did. And in my young mind, I truly believed it was the doll, not my mother, who was to blame for everything. I snapped then. I screamed in indignant rage, and I threw the bottle as hard as I could at the bed. It hit Betsy on the forehead, and she fell on the floor. Good. I picked up the bottle, and I hit her again and again. I thought I heard her laugh, and I hit her harder. Then I laughed. When my rage was spent, I dragged Betsy to my toy chest and threw her in. I slammed it shut and kicked the chest against the wall. I never wanted to see Betsy again, ever. I never owned another doll after Betsy. About a week later, the police came and 2 nice ladies took me to live in a new home in a new state, with food and toys and no drugs. The trunk went into storage and the wagon disappeared. I never saw my mother again. As I got older, my foster parents admitted she was in jail doing 25 years. That was fine with me. I felt nothing for her anyway. I still had nightmares because of my life with that woman. But then slowly I began to heal. I focused on doing well in school, and I ignored my mother's letters from prison. She reached out to me several times in my 20s as well, but I always declined her calls. That is, until this morning. I'm 30 now, with my own children and a loving, honest husband. I have a beautiful house, 2 dogs, and a career as a social worker trying to make a difference for kids who had it bad like me. I'm happy, I'm steady, and I'm content. So when I got a voicemail from my mother informing me she had been paroled and that she wished to speak, decided to let her say her piece. Since the kids were home from school, I went out into our shed in the backyard to return my mother's call. The shed was the children's domain, and they used it to play in the summer. I sat on my old toy chest, which was currently being used as tea party table, and dialed the number she had left me. Hello? Laura? Hello, Mother. How are you? Oh, Laura, thank you for speaking to me. I know you have your own life now and a family, and I would love to meet them someday. I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am. For everything. Mother, you are not meeting my kids, ever. And since you call me, I'm going to say what I've needed to say for years. The opium, the heroin, they destroyed you. And the worst of it is that you almost took me down with you. I was 5. That was no home for a child. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you so long to get caught. Laura, I know how it seems, but I honestly know nothing. Look, it hardly matters, and I do understand why you would feel that way. Why you would hate me and not want me to meet your little ones. I learned a lot about forgiveness while I was away and just... Oh, Laura, I am so sorry about Betsy. Betsy? I paused, confused. Why would you care about her? I know, Laura, believe me, I do. It was all my fault. The drugs, the partying, and Betsy, oh God, if I had only paid attention, if I had only known. She's gone, and it's because of me. As my mother began to cry, I tapped my fingers on the toy box impatiently. The drugs had clearly fried her brain. Mother, why are you talking about Betsy, and why do you even care? I know where Betsy is. Right underneath me. What are you talking about, Laura? Oh God, where is she? I shifted uncomfortably. Well, Betsy's in the trunk, where she's always been. There was a beat of stunning silence. What do you mean your sister's in the trunk? Sister? What the hell are you talking about? Back on drugs so soon? That's a record even for you. Betsy's a goddamn doll. I locked her in my toy box a few days before you got arrested for possession. Laura, oh God, no. No, Laura, what have you done? I wasn't arrested because of the drugs, Laura. I was arrested because of Betsy's disappearance. You always called her your little doll, but we thought you knew. Oh God, we thought you knew. Laura, no, what have you done to my baby? My mind had gone blank, and with no emotion, I set the phone down next to me and stood up. I could hear the muffled sound of my mother's anguished cries and feel the dark clutch of possibility in my own chest. Memories were stirring in the back of my mind, threatening to flood forward into my consciousness. They pushed against a door in my mind that had been locked so tightly for so long that I'd forgotten it was even there. Was it even possible? Could the trauma and the opium have really led me to believe that a small child was actually a doll, begging for food and utensils to eat with, asking me to protect her from the bad man? No. I slowly turned around and brought my eyes down the makeshift tea party table. Surely it was too small. You couldn't fit a person in there. You couldn't. But then, what about a very small, starving, emaciated child? What about her? Would she fit? Would an investigator even bother looking for a person in this chest? I knew I wouldn't. It was just too small. And I was sure we had opened the toy box at some point over the years, hadn't we? Or had something swimming in the dark recesses of my memories always stopped me? I couldn't remember ever seeing it open. I knelt down to the ground and opened the clasps. It would be better to not look. After all that I had overcome, this new life that I had earned for myself, it could all be undone by opening this toy box. I shouldn't open it. I should throw it in a landfill and forget it ever existed. I should not look inside. I opened the chest. I never had a doll. My mother never could afford to buy me one. I never had a wagon either, for that matter. But I did have a toy box. A pretty blue and white toy box. And when I was 5, I beat my little sister to death and put her in it. 3. He stood against my window. I don't know why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window. His forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still and light, and he smiled a lipstick red cartoonish grin. And he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs sleeping. My son was in his crib and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him looking past me through the glass. Oh, please no. His smile never moved, but he put a hand up and slid it down the glass, watching me, with matted hair and yellow skin, and faced through the window. I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen, feet still in the bushes I was pruning, looking into my home. He stood against my window. 4. I found an open Wi-Fi connection. They didn't believe me when I told them there was an open wireless network in my range, aptly named Free Wi-Fi. It was rather slow, but that's not the problem. You see, we were camping out in the middle of nowhere, Tar Hollow Forest for any fellow Ohioans out there. We parked the truck about a mile down the trail, and from there it was a 15-minute drive to the only ramp onto the highway. We were far removed from civilization, to say the least. After we were all done checking in on Facebook and replying to Snapchats, my friends and I made a game of finding the source of the signal. Marco and Sean went in one direction, Mike and I went in the other. 3 minutes later, we were all back at the site. The signal dropped off after 185 paces in the direction I went and roughly 250 in the opposite. We agreed with Sean's proposal to go in a third direction, so to approximate by triangulation the whereabouts of the source. Marco counted the steps. Mike kept an eye on the signal indicator. Sean and I looked out for anything that remotely resembled a router. About 100 feet in, Mike told Marco to stop counting. The signal was at full strength. I looked around for flashing LEDs or running cables or anything that lit up. Marco suggested it could be a pocket Wi-Fi hotspot that another camper had left behind, though that was unlikely since there was no 3G coverage out there, but we found nothing. We gave up the search and made way back towards the campsite. That's when the Wi-Fi signal disappeared. The sun was settling and it was starting to fog up. A little spooked, we agreed we would pack our stuff and hike back to the truck. When we got back, we realized we'd been robbed. Our bags were torn open, our food supplies were missing, and our tents were toppled. What immediately seemed odd was to me that the thieves hadn't taken our laptops or cameras. Upon closer inspection, all they took were the foods and beverages, and in my opinion, that was the scary part. Needless to say, we crammed whatever we could into our torn-up bags and made a dash for the truck. It wasn't until we got onto the truck that Mike told us to check our phones. The Wi-Fi signal was at full strength again. A chill ran down my spine when I saw the name of the connection.
Run, boys, run.
1. The Smiling Man. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all of that changed in a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrol parked quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about a half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he'd been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was more a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. Well guys, those are my 5 creepy stories that I had for you today. I think I picked a good bit of variety in there. Some of those stories definitely had some surprise endings that I, even reading them, did not expect. I hope you enjoyed those. I hope you didn't listen to these in the dark. If you do and you are fine, you are much stronger than I am. I hope you are taking care of yourself. I hope everybody is doing well, and I hope you enjoyed this video. By all means, please comment down below, share your thoughts, and maybe share some creepy stories of your own. Let me know what you thought of this video, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, have a happy October.